Happy New Year, everyone. Last year, we had the privilege of having a PMI Future 50 honoree of 2023, Miss Crystal Brady, talk about all the great work she's doing to use project and program management principles and foundationary practices to help in her work with cancer research, with her American Society of Oncology. This year, we're very grateful to also have 2024 Future 50 honoree, Captain Schafer, who we look forward to sharing his story with. Okay, so we're very privileged and honored to have yet another PMI Future 50 winner. In this case, Captain Schafer. His friends call him Jimmy, so hopefully by the end of this, we'll all be friends. Sir, congratulations on the great honor. How is it communicated to you that you had this distinguished honoree from PMI Global?
Well, thanks, Matt, for the opportunity. I'm really excited to speak at your chapter. I got notified via the PMI CEO. She kind of gave me a notification. I've been working off and on with, well, not off and on, I've been working for the past 4 years, forming like a strategic partnership with PMI and Department of Air Force, more on the acquisition side. And so those channels notified me that it's coming up, and then the CEO notified me like a couple months ago.
Great. Were your colleagues surprised at the honor, or is this just kind of something that you kept yourself?
Yeah, it's it's kind of a mixed bag. I'm currently kind of out of my career field. So I'm a program manager within the Space Force currently. But I'm in an intelligence and cyber organization. And so most people don't even know what is a PMP, what is a PMI, like they switch like, can I get my PMI? Like, no, it's not quite that. Also I don't talk about myself much at all. But I let a couple of people know. And I try to hide the rest of it, but my boss ended up finding out, so I got a little, pat on the back. But I just did it more for the fact of just wanting to improve our strategic partnership, and so I guess I got recognized for that.
Yeah, like I'll hear a lot of like just people that think they know what they're talking about, and they'll be like, "Oh, like we need to be like PMBOK trained and all that." It's like, well, you're kind of getting it right, but essentially that's like a book and a study guide and a reference. But at least they know the term. So, okay, so let's start from the beginning. So you grew up in the great state of Alaska, and I think still visit family there multiple times a year. For most of us who didn't grow up in Alaska, what's it like growing in a state where only 2% of the state's civilized living and the rest is untouched wilderness?
It's a great question. I rarely get actually talk about Alaska. It's beautiful. Like the main thing is people describe it as the air quality is very unique. The mountains are great. The people are wonderful. We grew up in Alaska. You call the South the lower 48. And parents moved up there like it was like in the 70s, which a lot of people tend to do. Like it's a lot of people like go to Alaska even today. They kind of want to get away from society, kind of like make their own culture. So it's a very nice. People are very private up there. So when I noticed I moved down eventually to lower 48, I realized like the main cultural shift was just people ask questions. And then they have to make a comment about yourself, about like, your decisions or oh, that's different. But people, you kind of just let bygones be bygones up there. But it's wonderful time. If you like, I can just give a quick recap. Would that be helpful as far as or as a part of the questions kind of go along that track?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, I'm sorry. My what?
Oh, yeah. So I grew up in Iowa, and like the people and like I still think I have those Midwestern values of like friendliness and making a stranger's day, or at least learning more about people. So like at the mall entrance at the Pentagon, like I'm the one who's like holding up the security guard by like talking to him and probably not letting him do his job. But and I've been removed from Iowa for 24 years now, but still I think have like that kind of Midwestern value. So I get that. One of the mottos you live by is the hand of the diligent makes rich. Can you kind of describe what that means to you? And
Yeah, no, that's I think in the end, work harder, not work smarter and less not harder kind of thought process. But diligent hand makes one rich. I think it's just especially for those that work in heavily bureaucratic organizations like Department of Defense and the federal government, and of that, a big portion is acquisitions. Uh, you have to think long term, and you have to try, because there's a lot of I wouldn't say stuck mindsets. I mean, there are, but just people are just oversaturated, and the flavor of the month and changes, and change fatigue, reoptimization, reorganization, switching from counterinsurgency to great power competition can be tough for people. So I think that for me, you have to try, and the first time doesn't work, the third time, the five times you tried, and then the sixth time actually makes some headway, and then you kind of pull that thread and get longer. So it's something that's helped me a lot. I still have so much to learn in acquisitions and project management, but I think that's kind of like a model.
yeah, failure's not bad if you learn from it. So, um, uh, Megan McArdle wrote a good book maybe 10 years ago about learning from failure. And yeah, I think there's merit to it, but there's also the mental side of it. If you continue to fail on something, that resilience to keep trying or to adapt and hope for better outcomes. Uh, so
No,
going from
I agree.
yeah, going from Alaska to the military, at least in my awareness, most commissioned officers enter after their bachelor's degrees earned, early 20s. But you joined after your postgraduate degree when you earned your MBA. Was the goal to? Uh, oh, go ahead. Oh, yep. Oh, was it a goal that you wanted to be more ready for the venture, so you went after your master's, or did that calling of military service and serving your country come later in your academic journey?
I think it's for a number of options. I think the main one is I didn't do ROD or Air Force Academy. In the Air Force, you have officer training school. Actually, I did try to join in 2013, but that was sequestration. I know that. But bottom line, like, we're not accepting anybody, and so I was always appealed about Air Force and leadership, but it wasn't the right time. So I wanted to make myself more value added, and so that's where I worked in industry as a corporate buyer for sporting goods for a Fortune 500 company. So I learned a lot of good things there. I felt the little things I did in like business really did help prepare me for what they chose my career field, which was actually quite aligned, program management. So I felt it helped a lot, actually. Business is business, no matter where you cut it. You just have to learn unique as you there are competition vernacular and the nuances in the politics. Also, what it crossed. Positions of requirements, if you can trace it to the underlying statute or requirement or need from combat command commander or SecAF, Superior Force or something, then you can make that way. So that was like the nuances that you just had to change that from my business experiences into the military.
Nice. Yeah, and I mean, there's the whole like you see some people who get degree after degree after degree after degree before they even go in the workforce. So they're like a 26 or 27-year-old PhD, and have they really mastered? Okay, so I think PMI Global's eyes came to you after your 2023 Air University academic paper was published. Being a postgraduate Air University student myself, I understand it, but like if people are like, "Where do you go to school?" and you're like Air University, they look at you like you're on a different planet. So could you explain to our members what Air University is and how it delivers value not only to airmen but other DoD members?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's each branch does have their own approach, but Air Force provides Air University is our large academic institution that's led by a 3-star, as you know, which speaks a lot. If you want to know the importance or how much importance the Air Force will place on it, look at the star level it is, and so they put a lieutenant general in charge of it, and then you have your offshoots of it, Air War College for senior development education, Air Command Staff College for, majors or GS-13s. And then you have, Squadron Officer School for like captains and GS-12s. And then you have your airman leadership courses, sergeants, Master Sergeant School, chiefs. So it's just a conglomerate of a whole spectrum of different phases and careers and stuff. And I happen to be under Squadron Officer School, and I got picked up to I pitched. There's program where you're pitching your ideas of what to make something better. And for me, I'm obviously passionate about project management, and so that was where I got picked up. And that was about a 9 month peer review published process through university. So I think it's a great opportunity for people in the Air Force. From my knowledge, I mean, there might be exceptions. It's free, and there's amazing experts, and you have as you know, a huge repository of information that you can go off to further project and idea theory, or someone else's theory to grow. So Air University, I highly recommend.
Yeah, I mean, for my course load right now, it's a lot of international security studies and joint planning, and it just as your moderate successful IT guy, like it's been eye-opening, but great curriculum, and all the professors are really well invested, and this isn't their full-time job. Like they're squadron commanders or wing commanders somewhere else, and still doing this at a high proficiency level. So it's been impressive. So your paper was focused on aligning Department of Air Force's program management industry standards, and then through kind of an industry standard disconnect theme. And kudos on the great research. He called out 72 billion being spent on Air Force acquisition efforts, and really took the bigger machine to task of calling out the system and culture not being focused enough on addressing the critical challenges, but just adding new systems. And oh, this is shiny, this can do this. And I grew up in the military in the 2000s, where like this retired general works for this software company now, they have a good product, let's add that. And slowly that adds, and then you have one base having a system that does the exact same thing that a base a state away does, and we're paying for both systems. And I think there's really a modernization effort right now in trying, at least in my human resources talent management world. So I see how all these systems that have duplicated functions can kind of take on a life of their own. In a lot of sectors, our captains and majors are the heart of the military, but it's a lower rank in terms of impact and influence. So speaking out against the bigger machine and calling things out as failures or not successful could be a little risky. So was there any hesitation in your paper to take such a hard line of calling out the bigger acquisition machine for uh, what could be perceived as failures or not being fully successful? That you feel you at least had the backing of the academia part of it, but was there some hesitation that there could be, perceived in a not the light you were looking to have it in?
No, that's a good question. I definitely would agree that not maybe caution. I think it was as you know, like with acquisitions or in any kind of military organizations, there's just so many hands in the cookie jar, and there's not like one single person really that's responsible for a lot of the I would say the challenges, the disconnects, for like you brought up the retired general so and so, this is a great thing from his business development, and the team jumped on it, and now you have redundancy in your IT section. um but like who actually made that decision for the general, like to retired general to SRs choose that product or that service? I mean, it was like the contracting officer, the finance officer that approved it, or the higher person that was it the trace to the requirement? Was it the base commander? Uh, at, Basically, what I'm getting at is like I feel like that was kind of the same approach for. So I didn't feel too concerned as far as uh, my language, but I definitely wanted to provide it as not a like poking a person in the eye, but more of like providing like here's research and observations, and also I worked with a number of people to have them look over the paper and provide their inputs. Like, uh, and I guess I won't say the names of those individuals, but we say they're pretty high up for all of our uh, acquisition organization. So like Space Systems Command, which is responsible for about 80% of the Space Force budget, Lifecycle Management Center, which is the preponderance of acquisitions under Air Force, under Air Force Material Command. But yeah, I felt supported in saying that, because I mean, in the end, when you do the splash, you think you hopefully it'll be like a cannonball and like everyone will look like, but in the end, it's like you do it, and then it takes 6 months, a year, 2 years for people to kind of like get the momentum, and that you kind of build from that paper. So I don't know if I exactly answered your question, but it was it's kind of like the start of a long road that I have in mind, that it might still be a number of years to kind of get to where I'm hoping to get.
No, yeah, definitely answered it, and kudos for being able to look at the research, and I'm sure you conducted multiple interviews and things of that to get to that conclusion. So I think program management and project management are synonymous, but they're different depending on the sector you're in. They can have different roles. Can you tell us a little bit about how in today's U.S. military the program management and the project management roles either complement or duplicate each other?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's really, I think it's a little challenging for both the internal and external to understand the difference. I don't think there's too much research. So that's me. Now that I've kind of got like a little more free time, I may want to write a paper on that just to kind of help translate that. But to kind of simplify it, so a project manager is in charge, depending on where you are. Like a project manager of a small mid-tier business can actually have a lot of control, but a project manager in like for Boeing or Toyota or Daimler Trucks, obviously is probably much lower. In the Department of Defense, I think it came from, originally we call program of record, and we always call our things programs. And in the Department of Defense, projects is a way to a smaller program, but it's inconsistent throughout, even within Life Cycle Management Center. So the way I try to clear cut it is a program manager within the Department of Defense is really a project manager. And then it depends, and also program manager within Department of Defense is a very broad term. and depending on which branch as well. But in like the Air Force and Space Force, which now it was like 72, 73 billion, 23, now it's obviously gone up quite a bit. We're at 23 billion Space Force acquisitions, and I think we're in the highest for billion acquisitions. We have the captains and leaders. They're all called for managers, but project managers in Fireside. So if I'm jumping around, that would be who would have a leaders, so brands, the industry as
Yeah, and stakeholder management, at least in my part of the Air Force, is interesting because it's like, well, who's the program manager? Well, who's the sponsor? Who's the business process owner? Who's the requirements owner? Who's the mission owner? Like, there's all these roles that don't necessarily fit inside like a project management standard or in the PMBOK necessarily. So that's where there's uniquenesses with Department of Defense, but I think we worked through it. But I think your explanation of program versus project was good. When did you first become aware of PMI? The PMI, I think there's 2 chapters in Alaska. Were those on your radar at all growing up? Or
no, I'd actually learned there's like later in my career, or maybe my business part. I learned it when I was at Wright-Patterson, when I was doing advanced avionics for fighter jets, mainly electronic warfare. So at that time, it was after 3 years, about 3 years, I had it's to be a military program manager in the Air Force, Air Force at that time. And contact with University, our intermediate things developed us, and then Institute of Technology, University, as you know. So there, so all those certifications in the mind of the Department of Air Force, full certified as a project manager or program manager. And surrounded by a bunch of other more senior programmers, mainly one was mentioned the ESA radar program for to kind of recap, working along with a bunch of senior program managers that were doing high demand, high urgency radar program for the Air Force. And one I sat next to, worked a lot with, he was responsible for getting critical new radar on half of the fighter fleet of the Air Force. So he was getting calls from Congress, 4-star generals. It was very intense. And after 2 years of doing that, he decided to transition to the reserves. And he says, and then he decided to get his PMP through PMI, obviously. And that's where he says, you know what, just simply studying for it and taking the test, it made me realize how I would have done everything differently. And here's a person that was, built up through all the programs and trainings and stuff. And so that was kind of like my first kind of shock of the disconnect. And so then after that, I started my own studying and growing and working with PMI. And I can say now, after doing all this, yeah, there's definitely a disconnect. And we talked a little about stakeholder management, just from start to finish. How do you do meetings? How do you prioritize? How do you work your integrated product team? How do you generate requirements? How do you communicate that? How do you prioritize all your stakeholders? And in some cases, in the government, there's many stakeholders. So, and through that, worked with local chapters, and then mainly I worked with the business development of Project Management Institute to see how we can forge a better relationship, because it's all right there. The information's there. We just need to have a better connection, and so via training and development.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I've learned in my defense career that the Defense Acquisition University looks at program management differently in terms of their own certifications versus the PMI industry certifications. That you can be coded as a certified acquisition PM if you have 8 years of program management experience, and then pass the custom DAU exams, which aren't easy. Like I've been impressed with the Defense Acquisition University in terms of this isn't just click next, 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 and then there's a couple softball, quiz questions. Like it's detailed. If you're gonna earn the title of the Certified Acquisition PM, you've earned it. But those are more tailored to the DoD mission. How would you describe the DAU courses in terms of being challenging and having a return on investment in comparison with more of the PMI industry standard, agnostic of any specific industry?
That's a great question. I think there's still good value within the Defense Acquisition University DAU. I find the PMP is focusing on that is instant. It's instant gratification. It's instantly, here is a 60 to 70 years of best practices and a structure to equip you on how to tailor it to your industry, whether hotel industry or cars or weapon systems. You could use 60 to 80% as a typical statistic I hear of PMI. Then you have to tailor it. The DAU portion is that 20% industry specific, and hence why I think it's you want to do both, because DoD is immensely complex and a steep learning curve. So the rule of thumb, I've talked with many senior leaders with regards to trying to use the right words without naming people, within program management within the Air Force, is that you go through DAU, you get about 25% of the knowledge because it's dense, and you're talking about you may not even get to that part for 5 to 10 years from now, whether it's in sustainment or research and development, procurement, operational test and evaluation. That's a whole ballgame, just that alone. So you go through the classes, you get about 25%, and then you do it eventually in your career if you stay long enough in the Department of Defense, and that's about 50%. And then you do it again via maybe and now we've changed it to Program Management Level 2 in DAU, Defense Acquisition University, and then it finally clicks. You get that last 25%. Kind of like when you do your degree, you go out and do work, and then you come back and do your master's, and you're like, oh, okay, it's like you're climbing a mountain. You have a good view with your what's your level of learning, but then you get more experience, you go higher up, and then you get your higher level degree or your program management level, and you go up higher, and you just have a more strategic level perspective. So I think it's I think it's ripe for improvement, especially for the people that we're having higher turnover, recruiting, retention issues. As you know, in the civilian corps, there's more PCSs occurring. For those unfamiliar with PCS, just changing jobs. I think we need to do better in that realm.
Definitely. And I think you spoke to the different levels and the upper mobility of climbing the DAU ladder a little bit. I think that's where PMI hasn't been as successful, because of all the PMP certified professionals that keep that certification active, only 25% have taken that step up to get their PGMP, the portfolio or the program management professional certification. And then of that pool, it's like less than 5% that went the level up to get the portfolio management professional certification. So it seems like there's a lot of, well, I have my PMP, that's good enough. And at least with DAU, they make you continue to climb that ladder. So that's something that maybe PMI can grow from as well. And they've really excelled in the past 2 years in terms of the artificial intelligence training and awareness, that they were out in front with citizen development, of which I've seen firsthand be successful in the Air Force, of the Chaplains Corps saying, okay, I need an IT solution better than what we have now. The chaplains go through degree of training on platforms like Salesforce, and then they develop a product that works for them, and that was developed by the citizens, and which is the heart of citizen development. So and PMI is really adapted with that. So I think if you look at the PMP is more kind of the bachelor's degree, I think depending on which way you want to take your career, there's a lot of postgraduate opportunities within PMI between discipline, agile, business development, other things. But that is one of the things that I would give DAU credit to, is they make sure people continue to climb. So if you look at cost, schedule, and performance, the iron triangle of project management, it's not hard to understand. It's not necessarily even hard to do from a curriculum perspective, yet so many projects aren't coming in as forecasted and are requiring 2 to 3 times the initial cost estimate. From a DoD perspective and through your academic research, what did your research and findings show you in terms of the cause of why so many projects aren't fully successful?
I think there's a lot to unpack in there. It's a very important question. Like, why do we field our weapon systems, F-35 jets, to close, to IT systems, to satellites, to hypersonic glide vehicles? Why do we consistently are behind schedule, especially in the bigger programs, immensely behind schedule, immensely over budget? I think there's a lot of swim lanes you can talk about. So one swim lane is the gorilla, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is you could say Congress. We have federal acquisition regulations. We have external things that are out of our control at a branch specific. Not even the Secretary of Defense, let alone the Secretary of Air Force, can have sway, but they're not the signatories. They're not the. So we have those statutes that provide either restrictions or audit and verification. So you have that portion. You have other portions of budgets go up and down. Discretionary versus non-discretionary billet. We're also competing across the enterprise with the Marines and Air Force and Department of Energy. And then of that, when you break it down to like specifically the branch level, competing interests, I say training development is one, because I feel like in the Air Force, we still fail at identifying that project management is a technical skill set. And yeah, we have a DAU, so yeah, it's clearly a skill set. It's called out in the Project Management Improvement Act, or when President Reagan did it in the 80s of acquisition improvement, creating a career field. But I find that we still treat it in the Department of Defense as, oh, you're an engineer, or oh, you have a business, you did some business, or just nothing. You have a chemistry degree, or you're a pilot. Yeah, you'll do great in project management. You'll figure it out. And I find that the stumbling, creating unrealistic schedules, not accounting for risk, doing too much padding, not accounting. And then there's some things out of your control, like we switch from counterinsurgency to great power competition. Maybe you're in the drone area in Q9s. Well, you just lost a lot of funding for that, because now we're doing more of F-35s, and the Navy, the submarines, and aircraft carriers are taking more precedence over that. So kind of going like a broad sweep, and glad to talk about each one in detail, but I find that we have so little control as individuals in these programs versus like industry, for example, and that they all contribute to our cost schedule performance being underperforming. Specifically, I try to tackle it from the training and development, and I feel like that even amongst the sea of challenges of maybe external unruly stakeholders or external circumstances like shifting in your strategic objectives or you're losing funding, I still think in that small swim lane you can still make ends meet and get your weapons system or your defense program better off. But I think that's the part where I try to focus on.
Yep, great points. And you brought up training, and kudos again on the visibility and impact that I hope you've had with your published paper. But the recommendation, or some of the recommendations, were the Department of the Air Force and probably the DoD in a larger sense take a more direct partnership with PMI. NASA's had a 20-year partnership with PMI that their NASA training is credited for professional development units for PMP, but really excelled there and I think provided a model. And then you called out in the paper that airmen and other military members should be fully reimbursed, not only for their PMI certification exam, but also the prep or boot camp, or even having train-the-trainer approaches. And there's a lot of PMPs within DAF, within the Pentagon. Like, why are we not using that talent? And then you also added that the PMP should be factored in the performance reports and formal records, and right now they're not. So from that, paper was published in 2023. We're now in 2025. Have you seen any? It takes multiple years for policies to be integrated and implemented, but what have you seen from the recommendations that you made in the paper?
I think it's still a work in progress. I think three things that are ongoing. One being worked with Space Force to help start a pilot program to get civilian and military program managers PMP certified, and then measure their effectiveness in their cost schedule performance. So trace that. So that helped that was kind of like parallel to that paper. Another one is LCMC kind of doing bulk buys of the project management professional lifecycle management center. That's the largest program management organization within the Air Force that manages from cradle to grave. And the one in particular that's still I wouldn't say necessarily say stuck, but just there's a lot of changes, as you know, that's going on in the Pentagon with the new administration, and just shifting to great power competition. That one in particular is getting the PMP not necessarily required, but encouraged and integrated into our career development as civilian and military program managers, and that's currently at our senior functional within we call it SAF AQ, so Secretary of Air Force Acquisitions, and that's kind of hit some roadblocks. I mean, it has full support of every main organization that you would ever want within the Department of Air Force. So Space Systems Command, Air Force Lifecycle Management Center, Air Force Material Command, Nuclear Weapons Center, and so forth. And so I think we'll get there. So I think that paper has helped provide some momentum, but I think it's been stalling just because Space Force is changing a lot of their curriculum, and they've launched officer training course, which is like 12 months within how they train their officers after they commission. There's internal boot camps. There might be even fracture from basic military training. Like there's so much churn, and I say churn, but change that's going on. But I think like you're saying, it takes time for policy to change. So I think it's getting there. I think I still got maybe a couple more years to get to what I hope to be a more strategic partnership within Project Management Institute and Department of Air Force.
Yeah, here's hoping. You being the trailblazer that you are, I think, can be a big part of what that future looks like. For the viewers that aren't necessarily familiar with how military training works, like as a federal civil servant, if I have a desire for a specific training and it aligns within the career field. I'm not asking to go to a weekend culinary school or anything, but if there's a return on investment back to, HRIT, usually it'll get approved. Are we seeing that in the military ranks and not only at the commission side, but on the enlisted side? Or do you think because everything's mission first that training opportunities either aren't seized by the members or aren't approved?
No, I think that's a great question. I think Air Force, consistently, I've heard Air Force has a pretty good grasp as far as the other branches go. When I say Air Force, Space Force. The Space Force, for those that don't know, Space Force is like saying the Marines under the Navy. But the Marines, as some of you know, is like 125,000 active duty, and then another 100,000 plus for reserves. Space Force is just 9,500 military personnel, with another smattering of about 10,000 civilians. So we're very tiny. So that's why I should say Air Force. I think it depends on the career field. I think overall training is highly encouraged. I think we're seeing more and more enlisted getting their associates and then degrees. I think it's a matter of like, are you in hardcore operations? So like, I'll do that, training module or that key concept later. Or it could be the environment itself, like you have a culture of fostering growth and development. Or you're in an environment where you're undermanned, and so you're just making ends meet. But I think overall, I think that's probably one of the things I like personally most about the military and the civilian corps within the Air Force and Space Force is that we highly encourage growth and development. And you do something, you train, and then you come back and do something, and you're a little bit better and more efficient at it. So I would say that's it would depend specifically on the career field.
Great. Yeah. One of my biggest regrets from my 8 years in enlisted service in the Marine Corps was I didn't seize all the educational opportunities I could have. But a decade later, like I made up for it, but that was still lost time. And even with the post 9/11 GI Bill and things like that, at the end of the day, you're going to run out of money and have to pay out of pocket. But if you seize all the opportunities when you're still in uniform, that's money that doesn't have to come out of your GI Bill or out of pocket later. It's obvious from this hour of talking to you that you're a lifelong learner and definitely an executor of the knowledge you've learned. Could you speak to your leadership style in terms of making that contagious within your work environments so that your subordinates and team members and peers are as infectious for learning as you are?
Yeah, I just kind of repeat your question. Are you asking like, how do I kind of operate within my area as far as like leadership and how do I kind of operate? Is that a good way to reframe the question?
How are you inspiring others to have the same zest for knowledge and industry best practices that you have?
I think that's as you know, like when federal governments, it's all about legitimacy. And so like publishing a paper helps provide that. Credentials help with that. Expert opinions. I think that I leverage that part. I think what I try to do a lot is process improvement. I think that's and depending on which organization, like one organization I worked for is I'll probably never work for an organization that in my life. It was a high performing organization that I would say is a significant influencer in the federal government. But most of my organizations I come to, I feel like there's so much churn and so much turnover, naturally from military, but maybe a new contractor, government support contractors. I think the main way I try to inspire and lead is just try to get that organization to a functioning level with regards to that churn. So that's we call it initial qualification training. So when new people come in, how do you onboard them? Because that's your vulnerable group across any industry. Do they have the tools they needed, the things they can get to that learning curve, rather than it takes 2 years for them to get there? Can you get it in within 3 months? So I try to do that a lot. I try to set people up for success. especially our new ascensions and colleagues are like, what opportunities are out there? Like you're saying, like, especially in the Marines, it's like go, 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 go. But, maybe there would have been a time if there's you had a lucky supervisor that can like, hey, you got to take time for this. You got to take time for that. But sometimes we may not get that. So I try to be that kind of person of helping grow, um, our people. Because that's the cliche is like that's your greatest asset, and I truly do believe that. I'm more of a people first, because you take care of the people, the mission will be taken care of. I know in some circumstances we don't have that luxury, but I feel like in a strategic kind of positions as acquisitions and program management, that's what we should think of. But yeah, so I really just my jam is just how can we make the process better from knowledge management to onboarding to checking in on their 6 and 12 and 2 year mark to see if they're getting what they need, and just not let them hang out to dry.
Yeah, great points. I'm sure it's awesome to work side by side with you. So PMI's Future 50 concept is fairly new. I think in 10, 15 years time, looking at all the great things that all these recipients do, because this is really an eye on who are going to be our program and project management leaders of the next 10 or 20 years. And this is what these recognitions that you receive mean. So in the spirit of that, what's next? What is your next 2 to 3 years look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the main part is like I'm just going to beat that drum, and that drum is tracing our training and development, because that's something we have more control. Like trying to get an act of Congress or a new statute or Air Force regulations is a long time. But training and development is something that we have in action on. So that beating that drum is how can we trace our training and development to industry standard? And the PMP is not the panacea, but it's where's your comparable thing? And so like so beating that drum, and what does that mean? Getting the PMP is recognized, just like Navy's Civil Engineer Corps. They literally have a part of their career progression. Like in ours, we still don't have that. When you look at ours is called the talent management framework for program managers within Air Force Space Force. Like getting that included in there. This is your PMP. This is this is PMI. This is how tools help get you better. Technology. And so that's kind of like my, I guess, more knowledge spreading, working through PMI on white papers on how can PMI provide more support, working through business development on creating that partnership. And I think, the end goal is that, I'm not looking, to erase Defense Acquisition University, but looking at as we grow in program management in the Department of Defense, is that the PMP and really just PMI as an organization is integrated into how we train and develop. So that's kind of like my future. I think it's kind of an uphill battle, but I think that's what we always have to. There's always to make change, you have to kind of really push.
I definitely couldn't agree more. And I think the sky's the limit for the impact that you can make. So, Captain Reed Schafer, congratulations on your Future 50 acknowledgement. And for everyone who views this fireside chat, you'll definitely hear his name again, because I think this impact is here to stay. So thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you donating your day off to educate our chapter. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.